Over the years at RetroBlasting, I've gotten a lot of questions about where I get the hats that I often wear. And I've answered the question in several videos, but the answer doesn't seem to sink in. So this time I thought I'd do something a little different. Interview the man who has made the lion's share of my hats. A man I've known for many years, John Penman of Penman Hats. He is a master of the craft, the best hat maker in the business, and he's been a good friend of mine for over a decade or more since he took over the operations of Adventurebilt Hats, formerly run by Steve Delk, who was the man who made the hats for Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, who I knew going all the way back to the Indiana Jones message board days. John is not just an Indiana Jones hatter, he is a master hat maker, and he's made hats of all styles, all eras. He's done hats for movies and television. He did James Spader's hat in Blacklist. He's done hats for celebrities who use him as their exclusive hatter. William Shatner, Giancarlo Esposito, Carl Urban, Katie Sackhoff, Michael Rooker. It's an endless list of who's who because he's that good at what he does. So before you get into this interview, the links to his website and his store are in the description of this video. And you can also jump around in this video to see various chapter stops of questions he's answering. I took these questions from all over the internet from people who are interested in hats, interested in Indiana Jones. It's a good interview. I think you're going to find a lot of interesting stuff in it if you care about movie costuming or if you care about fine hats for your own daily life. So I hope you enjoy this. This is my interview with Penman Hats, John Penman. All right, we're just going to jump right into it because there are a lot of questions. There's like 5 pages worth of questions. First question is from Barclay Albright. How did John find that hat making was a passion for him?
That's a great question, and I can honestly say it was not a dream of mine when I was either a child, a teenager, or a young adult. I did like hats, like Bogart films.
Stuff that dreams are made of.
And then really kind of solidified with, of course, Raiders of the Lost Ark and chasing that hat. And that kind of led me to one of the indie forums where I met Steve Delk. And I was in the fire department out here locally and had a neck and back injury that I had to walk away from the fire service. And I was really only trained to do 2 things, and I couldn't physically do those 2 things. And Steve was very generous, saying, "You love hats and you got an interest in it. Let me help you." And I kind of jumped in, tried it, and it kind of blew up. And then I was really good at it, and I fell in love with it. And here we are.
KBA wants to know, based on that, what was it that sparked your interest in hats first and foremost?
Oh, I definitely think it's Bogart films, without a doubt. Bogart films. I love the clothing, the hats, the cars, the music. I just love that era.
It began to interest me, vaguely.
Yeah, I'm a private dick on a case.
Absolute huge Humphrey Bogart fan. And then I think when Raiders came out, I went, oh my goodness, that is the coolest look I've ever seen. It was such a pivotal movie for me. Cannot tell you how many times I've seen it. And then, like I said, I always kind of had in my past a creative side to me. And so hat making gives me an outlet for that creativity. And the more I did it, the more I fell in love with it.
He's looking at you, kid.
I can't claim that it was a dream of mine for a long time because it wasn't. It's one of those things where your life takes you somewhere where you weren't expecting, and it took me to the place where I'm supposed to be making hats because I absolutely love it. I love the process of actually physically making the hat.
What is the process of becoming a professional hat maker? Like when you decide you want to do that, as KBA is asking, how do you get started? What do you start doing?
I think it's hard for hatters. It's easier for milliners because milliners, there's classes out there. For hatters, there's no classes. It's predominantly done by an apprenticeship, and it's handed down generation to generation. And I was just fortunate enough, and I'm not saying that I like planned this all out, and I was caught up in a perfect storm. Steve didn't have someone to hand down in his family what he had, and I needed something, and we were kind of friends and everything, and I had an interest in hats, and that kind of just kind of connected. And without his help, it would be nearly impossible to get into it correctly without that apprenticeship. And like I said, there's no classes. You can see a couple of videos, there's a book here or there, but you're only getting like a broad stroke on hat making. You're not getting the details. And I can see that there's a lot of people who go out there and they try to make a hat and everything, and they just don't get it right because they're not getting those details. They don't not getting those minute little steps that are not covered in one book and a couple of videos.
What was that first step for you? What did you do? How did you say, you know what, I'm just going to try this? What was that first thing you did?
So my first step was talking to Steve Delk, and he said, "Let me help you." And I went, "Okay." So the first thing I did is I actually went to Burlington Coat Factory and I bought a few cheap hats that cost a few dollars. And I never have even threaded a needle or used a sewing machine, and I still don't know how to use a sewing machine. So to me, I just practiced taking apart the hat and sewing it together. That was like my first step. And then I would send photographs, and I would talk to Steve like every day on the phone for hours while he was working, while I was working. We're literally talking to each other, and I'm sending photographs back and forth. It was a long 2.5 year period of me learning all the steps, and he was kind of tutoring me via him in Mississippi and me in Oregon, using emails, photographs, kind of helping me through that process. And it first started with, like I said, just taking some cheap hats apart and trying to put them back together. And then I'd go out and I get myself a block and a flange, and I made a couple tools, I bought a couple tools, and I got the learning process. My biggest thought was to learn it intimately, and it took me a good 2.5 years before I even started thinking about selling a hat.
Barkley Albright asks, John, what was the largest obstacle that you encountered in starting that career in becoming a professional hat maker?
He said we wouldn't get the treasure we seek on account of our obstacle.
What the hell does he know? He's an ignorant old man.
That's a fantastic question. One is that there was not a lot of information out there. There's not a lot of places, like there's no store to go out and buy, like, hey, I want to buy equipment for hat making. There is no place to go do that. You have to search and find it. And sadly to say that the business, especially at the time I got into it, hat makers keep things close to the vest. Some of them do hoard stuff to kind of keep them out of other people's hands. So that's kind of the biggest obstacle trying to get into it. There is not a lot of help. And that's kind of sad because there's plenty of room for that to grow, because there's 8 billion people on the planet. I think Alexander Connolly III up in Seattle prior to COVID and before his death said that he estimated there was around 120 true hat makers. And if at that time, and I'm like, if there's only 120 and you have 8 billion people, there should be plenty of room for growth. There's plenty of people on the planet to do so. So I think that was the biggest obstacle, is trying to chase down equipment and materials, because you can't search on the internet and find it. It's really hard. The information is just not out there easily to get.
Jason Anderson wants to know, what's the difference between a milliner and a hatter?
Great question. So traditionally, milliners would make women's hats and hatters would make men's hats. And usually, traditionally, women made women's hats and men made men's hats. I don't know why, but that's traditionally how it was done. And women's hats were more ornate and beautiful and delicate, and men's were more go out in the elements and the weather to protect you from the elements whether you were hunting or whatever. Now they kind of cross over. You have female hatters and you have male milliners, and you have them kind of crossing over. You have some milliners making fedoras, and I can tell you're basically making a hat. That's the same, but the techniques are slightly different when they come to blocking and finishing and stuff like that. They're different skill sets. I can tell if someone sends me a photograph and like, here's this fedora, and I go, oh, that fedora was made by a milliner, by milliner skill sets, because I can see the way the ribbon and bow was sewn on. I can tell the way that it's finished. It's a hard thing to explain without any visual aids, but there is definitely a technique that's different.
So in the famous scene at the end of Casablanca, we're saying that Bogart's hat on the tarmac was definitely a hatter's hat, and Ingrid Bergman's hat was a milliner's hat. Is that fair to say?
I think that's pretty fair to say, yeah.
Okay. Now, Nathan Andrews is asking, how did you get selected by Steve Delk? Now, for everybody in context, Steve Delk He's a legend in the Indiana Jones community. May he, rest in peace. We miss him dearly. But Nathan asks, how did you get selected by Steve Delk, the Hatter of Indiana Jones and the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, to take over his legacy? How did that happen?
By being a pain in the butt. No, actually, he had someone else in mind before me, and it didn't pan out. What he did originally, he would say, yeah, let me help you out, because he knew I injured my neck and back. And I said, oh, I'd love to learn. I'll fly down to you and spend a few days with you. And he's like, okay. He would give me some tips and some suggestions, and I would do it. And I was constantly bugging him. He's like, I'm busy. It's not a good time. Don't come down. He kept sending me stuff to do. And I was like, he's never going to invite me down. So I'm just going to do it. And that's when I started with the Burlington Coat Factory hats and taking them apart and putting them together. And I kept sending him pictures and calling him and asking questions. And then the more I showed him, the more information I got from him, the more help I got. And then looking back on it, I figured out what he was doing. He wasn't going to invest any energy or effort into me unless I put effort and energy into learning. And I think that's what happened with that first person, is that they wanted just to come in and have him show him, and then that person goes off and starts making hats, and he was disappointed by that person. So he's like, why put energy into someone who's not going to put any effort into it? And that made a lot of sense.
I respected your privacy, and I taught you self-reliance.
I think that's what it was, just being consistently every day, calling him up with questions, sending him photograph after photograph, sending him hats and going, what do you think of this? What do you think of that? And just picking his brain until he had nothing left to give to me. And I think that was the thing, is I had to prove myself that I was going to put the effort in. I think effort was the key word.
Maximum effort.
What was that moment for you when he said, I want you to be the guy that picks up the baton? What was going through your mind when he told you that?
It was a great moment. I felt really proud of myself, because I admire Steve not only as a hat maker, but as a person. He's a good man. He's a kind person, compassionate person. I felt extremely honored and touched by the thought. I wanted to honor him. And the first thing I wanted to do with all the stuff he gave me, like he gave me blocks for Indy 4 Hero hat and Indy 4 travel hat, his Raiders block, all his stuff that he was famous for not only the Indiana Jones 4 movie, but him basically reverse engineering and reviving the Raiders hat, because no one could really get a really good Raiders hat until he reverse engineered and brought it back to its kind of glory, and again brought him full circle and got him the Indy 4 contract. So I wanted to honor him by doing a Raiders legacy felt, which was a very lightweight, thin, pliable, because I think I figured out what they did to get that felt to be so thin and pliable. And I put it together, and I did the packaging with the hat box and all this stuff together, and I had one package it up and send it to him to get his approval. And his reply to that is what really hit me and touched me. Is he goes, don't send it. And I was like, why? I want to get your approval. He goes, John, I love everything that you're doing with your hat business. I'm in good hands. I don't want to mess you up by putting my 2 cents in. And to me, that was even more important than him wanting to pass the baton to me. To have that kind of confidence in me really meant the world to me.
Steve's claim to fame, for those of you that don't know and didn't know who he was before Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, was his unlocking of the shape of the Raiders of the Lost Ark Fedora and finally getting that right, where even the original Hatter had since failed for many years. What is so difficult about that hat that to achieve it plagues the average hatter and the average hat wearer? Like, what is it about that hat that has been so elusive for so many years? From the mouth of an experienced hatter who's made thousands of them, what is it about that thing that's so hard to catch?
Well, I'm going to have to answer that in 2 different ways. First, I'm going to say I'm going to go with Steve's opinion on it, because I think he nailed it really well. Is that to replicate any of the indie hats, and specifically the Raiders of the Lost Ark hat, because that hat is the most scrutinized hat in history, right? And he says to replicate that, especially the Raiders hat, you have to be a great hat maker and you have to be a fan. You can't be one. So you have professional hat makers who can construct a great hat. And I'm not talking about the cosmetics of it. I'm talking about, structurally speaking, can make a great hat. And they can also make a very cosmetically good looking hat as well. If you're a great hat maker and you're not a fan, some of the details are going to be lost to you because you're not nitpicking it like the fans do. And then if you're a fan, but you're not structurally a professional hat maker who knows how to construct a hat, the hat's not going to be constructed right. And to me, the most important part of the construction of the hat is the sweatband, because that's that part of the hat that touches the person's head. So if that's not done correctly on how it's belled and how it's cut and how it's sunk into the hat, then you got a problem. It's not going to be a comfortable hat. It's not going to look right. Now, structurally speaking, what's the details of the hat that are hard about it is or hard for people to make is the problem that I find, and I can only speak from my point of view, is that I think every fan who watches it, they'll see one scene of the front, one scene of the left side, one scene on the right side, one scene on the back, one scene from the top, and they're in their head, they visually construct a hat that isn't there, because that hat was so light, thin, and pliable that the slightest, like if you sat it on the table and you dropped the dime on it, it would make an indentation on the crown. So it was constantly moving, and you and I have seen the special features where Harrison is in between scenes is fidgeting with the crease of his hat. And so here it is, people construct in their head what the hat's supposed to look like, and in reality, that's not the case.
Your appearance is exactly the way I imagined.
So that's one thing that you have to fight up against, and then everybody sees that hat differently. That's why prior to COVID, I had multiple offerings of Raiders hats to try to satisfy each and every person, and it would literally drive you mad, pun intended.
How many Indiana Jones hats have you made, and are you sick of brown felt by now?
Thousands, all right? Definitely thousands. I'm not sick of brown felt, because here it is, when I'm blocking a hat or pouncing a hat or sewing the parts and everything like that, the color really doesn't matter, because you still got to block the hat no matter what the color of the felt is. You still have to pounce it, and color does play a slight role on how I pounce a hat, but I'm not really thinking color when I do it. I'm just feeling it and going with it. When I'm sewing parts, the only time I'm looking at the color is to make sure that I got the right color felt with the right felt for what the customer asked for, and that's the only time I'm thinking about when I'm sewing. I match the thread with the ribbon, but the technique and the skill that I'm doing to sew it together, it's the same, so it doesn't really matter. I'm still going through the same steps, but I will say there are times that if I'm finishing off, because I can't make a hat from beginning to end in one day. You know, if I start a hat, it probably takes me 2 to 2.5 weeks, because there's a lot of drying time for the felt. So I'm working on multiple hats in multiple different stages at a time. But when I'm finishing a hat, like sewing the parts into the hat at the tail end, I can knock that off in the same day. And as I'm sewing that, if I go, okay, I did a Raiders hat, or I did an Indy hat, and then the next day I do an Indy hat, and the next day I do an Indy hat, and then the next do an Indy hat. By the time I get to the end of the week, I go, didn't I finish that hat already? Why do I feel like I'm still working on it? Like, I do have those moments a lot, because, you know, Indy hats is kind of what I'm famous for, so I do make a lot of those, and I do get excited when someone goes, oh, they want something that's a color that I haven't done very often compared to like the Indy hats, the Indy brown and everything. So I do get kind of excited like that, and I do get excited when someone approaches me and says, hey, make me a hat for me, and they give me the creative freedom to pick the style, the brim size, the ribbon color, the color of the felt, all that, then yeah, that gives me more to do outside of constructing the hat.
Jacob Bassett wants to know, what are some characteristics that make the Crystal Skull hero and train hats different from the other films?
Well, the travel hat is a different shade of gray than the Raiders travel hat. It's a lot lighter. It's a granite color. And the crown height is taller than any of the other Indy hats, whether they're hero or travel, across the board. That means the movies, the Young Indiana Jones TV show, it's the tallest crown. And then the hero hat, there is some characteristics in that hat. A lot of people like to describe that the Crystal Skull hat is like a hybrid between Raiders and Last Crusade, and they wouldn't be wrong, because it is as boxy as the Raiders hat, and it doesn't have that Raiders turn, and it doesn't have that tight pinch. It has a little bit more of a Last Crusade feel. Like I said, I don't think they're wrong. It's the hybrid of the two. There are 3 things that Steve did to his hat, the hero hat, so this way other hat makers can't replicate it so well and so easily. And I got to tell you, I think there's 2 of them that no one would ever guess. You know, like even if you had his block, you would not figure it out.
Come on, genius.
KBA wants to know, Is there a lesser known fictional character's hat that you wish was more widely recognized and appreciated?
Wow, that's a good question. I've never even thought it. Like, I love Tom Baker's Doctor Who hat, but I think it's pretty recognizable, at least to the Doctor Who fans.
Exactly, Brigadier.
I mean, I love his whole look when he first shows up in his first season. I love that very bohemian look of his with the scarf and the burgundy coat and the hat. I gotta say, man, that even though I make a lot of them and sometimes I go, not another brown hat, that Raiders hat, man, it's hard to top, man. It has so much character. It's such a beauty, man. It's hard to top that one, man. It really is.
Andrew Devitt asks, he says, before the dawn of fast fashion, clothing was an investment. People were willing to pay more for a product that would last. What makes a quality hat? What gives it the durability and longevity that makes it an investment piece that can be worn for years? And what are the tells of an inferior product that's made only to last one season?
Love this question. Actually, there's two questions in there, and I love them both. Absolutely love them both. All right, so let's start with the latter first. When I'm talking to someone who's new, want to get into hats and everything, I give them what I call a little hat 101 when it goes to shopping of hats. And I'm going to be very blunt about it. If you see labels of small, medium, large, you run like hell. You're better off throwing your money out the window. If you see sizes like 7 1/4, 7 3/8, like hat sizes, you have a factory hat. Doesn't mean it's a bad hat. You have good factory hats. You have a potential of having a decent or good hat. If you don't see hat sizes on it and it's made to measure, then you have a potential of being a great hat that's going to last you a lifetime. And again, those are loose guidelines because you can have a custom hat not as good as it should be, and you have some factory hats out there that are better than that classification. So again, fast and loose rules, but it's a good starting point. One of the things I tell people to look for, and this is the most important for the hat, and I think I mentioned it earlier, is the sweatband. If the sweatband is not installed and cut properly, that's the biggest tell. So when someone comes into my shop and they're wearing another label and they go, hey, what do you think of my hat? And they hand it to me, the first thing I do is turn it over and I look and see how the sweatband is installed. I don't care how pretty the felt is or how pretty the ribbon is or how the color combination is really nice. I want to see that sweatband. So if your sweatband is not belled properly, so if you're looking at the hat as if it's a bowl of soup and you see the inside of the leather sweatband and it starts to roll out and hug the break line, that's where the crown meets the brim, and it doesn't have that nice snap to it, that's a tell, run. Okay, so those are my two biggest things. Now, to go to the first question, the longevity of hat. Now, for me personally, one, you got to start and you got to buy quality material. It has to start with what materials that you're working with. Construction-wise, what I do, and I can only speak about what I do, is I try to do everything I can to make the most durable felt. So I have a technique that I learned from Steve Delk, the pre-age and stabilized felt. So that's one thing I do to make the felt of the hat as stable as possible, because here it is, it's just matted hair. There's no such thing as a waterproof hat. So you have to make it as stable as possible. That's number one. And then when you're blocking it, you want to do things to make sure that the felt is stable as possible. On the construction part of it, I use thread that is not normally used for hats or clothing. And if you would take the thread and wrap it around your fingers like dental floss and try to break it, you would lacerate your fingers before you would break the thread. I'm not worried about my hats coming apart because of the thread popping. That's just not going to happen. And I went that route because a lot of people, other hat makers I've talked to say a little overkill. And I said the reason why I did it is because in my very beginning, my first year, I had a hat come back to me. A customer called me up and said, hey, I got your hat. I love it. But, I think my daughter or something like that got a little handsy with it and a stitch on the corner of the bow popped. And that absolutely drove me crazy. So I had him send it back and I fixed it and I sent it to him. And then I went searching for thread like that so that would never happen again. And it just doesn't happen anymore. So things like that, making the thing where I make it have a lot of longevity. I'm pretty sure that if any hat I've made you or anyone else, that hat's going to, with a little TLC, it's going to outlast you.
Keaton asks the question, when it comes to making hats, what is your favorite part in the process?
Good question. I've been asked that before, and I think a lot of people want to hear me say like blocking or pouncing or sewing, and all those are great guesses, but there's a part of hat making that I didn't understand until I started selling hats, and that's my favorite part, is that it connects me to people that I wouldn't normally have met and everything. There's people I have like yourself and celebrities and people from all over the world and all walks of life. And I, talk to them as I'm getting information so I can build their hat. And I get to be a part of their life for a little moment. And I get to learn these people and connect with these people. So that's kind of my favorite part. I know people want to say it's the physical aspect of it. If it was the physical aspect of it, probably pouncing, because it's the one that's the most fluid, hardest to do. I think you have the most amount of freedom. I kind of lose myself when I'm pouncing. Like if I'm blocking a hat, I got my Bluetooth earpiece. I can talk to someone on the phone when I'm blocking. When I'm sewing a hat together, it's literally repetitive and tedious. So I actually make less mistakes and move faster when I'm actually talking to someone or talking to someone on the phone and have that distraction. I'm just on autopilot and I just go because I've done the steps and I got that muscle memory. But pouncing, I kind of lose track of time. And I could literally have the phone ringing right next to me and not hear it because I'm so focused. So it's that I lose myself into it.
Hey, you awake?
Anna Shevalova asks, John, your hats are essentially portraits of their owners. They reflect their character, history, and style. Could you walk us through how a simple headpiece transforms into an object with a soul?
Man, that is a fantastic question. That is probably when I'm at my happiest, when I'm making a hat. You asked me earlier, am I tired of brown and indie hats and everything like that? I still enjoy, and I'm still amazed at taking a raw body or hood or blank, whichever term you want to use, and transform it into a hat like the Raiders hat or any of the indie hats. I'm still amazed by it that I can transform that and do that. So it's not lost on me. But when someone comes up to me and says, hey, can you create something for me? I want my hat. I don't want a hat that I've seen in a movie or a TV show or a magazine or a book or a photograph somewhere or anything like that. That's when I want to see photographs of the person. I want to ask them to friend request me on Facebook so I can kind of like stalk them a little bit and get to know them a little bit and try to pick up what they are about and try to transform that into a hat and capture that. It's probably the hardest part of hat making because you're trying to get to know this person, and like what I think should be on this particular person is like, oh, this is going to complement them really well, and I pick a style and a brim size and colors and ribbon, and that person may not see what I'm seeing.
Anyone ever tell you look like a penis with a little hat on?
And they may not be ready, because someone might go, oh no, I want something black because it goes with everything. Because you hear that a lot. Oh, I want to make a hat, I want black. If they don't know, they go black because they think it goes with everything. And it's probably one of the worst choices for a hat because you kind of pigeonhole yourself. And I might want to bring them out and give them some color and bring some of their personality that I see in photographs and bring it out and go, oh, you're not that person. You're bold and you're happy and you're joyful. Let that come out. And they're not ready to take that big leap. So I got to kind of like baby step them there with a couple of hats. It's a part that I don't get to do every time because most people, oh, I want this hat. I seen this hat over here. Make me that. And it's great. But to have that connection with the person, to answer her questions, literally is to bring the person and put them in the hat and everything. To see that person how I see them and then put it into the hat in a way.
In your communication with a client, Anna asks, what's more important to you, technically and accurately fulfilling their wishes, or grasping and perhaps even suggesting that elusive essence of their personality that they themselves may not fully realize?
It is a hard line to dance around because sometimes I get it right, sometimes I don't, where you have to balance like this would look so great on them. I wish they would see it. And they're like, no, they don't want to take that step. And this is what they want. And communication is the thing. If I can communicate and somehow get them to see what I see, then we can take that big step. If I can't do that, then I have to kind of side on technically what they wanted. The last thing you want to do is put something on someone and they walk away and they go, you look at it and everyone else looks at it and they see it and they go, wow, that looks great. And the person's like, I just don't like it. It's too bold. It's too this. It's too that. You got to balance it. You know, you got to read the person. This is definitely the hardest part.
So in your ideal world, more people would be like that stylish French guy that showed up to look at what was going on at the Louvre that day when the jewels were stolen. And he had the hat and the walking stick and the three-piece suit. And everybody thought he was a detective, but he was just a young guy who just liked to dress well.
Right. Right. Exactly. More power to him, man. I love it.
Nathan Andrews asks, given the specialized market for hats and the higher costs of production to make a superior quality product, how do you navigate an ever-changing market to stay profitable?
Whew, boy, yeah, that's a tough one. Yes, it constantly feels like I'm patting my head and rubbing my belly. It's tough because the hardest part is trying to keep true to what I love about hats and the trimmings, the ribbon. I'm going to focus on that because felt, you know, they do change. And felters do change their techniques. You know, they're always trying to save money and we're going to short this here, do this here. And it's a constant battle. And that's hard enough on its own. And then for me, I don't buy what you would call off the rack. Like if someone says, hey, I buy the same felt as Penman does, they're buying from the same place. They're not buying the same felt because most of the felt that I use is not off the rack. It's proprietary. They're my formulas that I've come up with, certain percentage of stiffener that I like, certain weight that I like, all those little tiny little details. So most of the stuff I work with is proprietary. So when it comes to felt, as long as I can get the felter to do that, I'm kind of good.
Jeremy Kerr asks, I would be curious as to how he goes about sourcing and choosing the materials used.
Sweatbands and liners, you have a lot of control over that. Ribbon is the hard one because most of the stuff I put on hats, since they're quote unquote dress hats, I'm using vintage ribbon or ribbon that was made exactly like they did back in the day on the high quality stuff, like, you know, the 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s. That's going to be hard because that stuff's going to run out. And luckily I have a couple of sources that still make that level of quality. Like if I showed you a vintage high quality ribbon, gross grain ribbon, and I showed you one made from this manufacturer today, put them side by side and even send them to a lab to they would not be able to tell the difference. But if you buy most modern gross grain ribbon, you could clearly see the difference across the room, or at least I can. But if you put it side by side in front of you, you would definitely tell the difference. And I think most people would go, oh yeah, that one's a little shinier, it has less ridges, it has this. You would see that difference. So the ribbon is going to be the hardest part of keeping the quality of ribbon, that standard when you put it on a hat. That is going to be harder and harder as time goes by. Also, there's so many hatters out there, especially on TikTok, where they put everything on a hat besides ribbon, and a lot of them put Petersham ribbon on it rather than gross grain. And before someone asked that question, gross grain is a ribbon that has a finished edge, and that's meant for hats. And Petersham is ribbon doesn't have an edge, so it looks a little rough and snaggly tooth when you put it on a hat, and to me never looks good. There's a lot more of that out there, and I just won't put it on there. I won't compromise that. I'm not saying other hatters are wrong for doing it. It's just that it just does not look good on a hat to me, so I just don't use it. If I make myself happy and I stay to my standards, true to myself, then I feel like I'm doing good by my customers. It's not just the ribbon, but even the felt. There's certain things I look for in a felt. The dyeing process for felt is the most important, right? There are about 9 or 10 felters in the world, and I only use 3 because of how they dye the felt. And when I'm making a hat, I use a lot of water and a lot of heat. And the combination of the two can cause the felt to bleed. So depending on the dyeing process, that's one of the biggest things. Because of my process, I have to have felt that doesn't bleed.
I ain't got time to bleed.
So that's one of the things, and I have a little test I do when I get samples of felt and I put them through. There's definitely certain things I look for, even a leather sweatband. I want a very wide reed tape. I look for the stitching pattern for how the sweatband is sewn to the reed tape, how pliable the leather is, how the leather was treated.
John Riggs asks, as a hatter who is known for making products meant for real-world everyday use, how do you deal with the desires of the costuming community who might not wear their hats often, but desire a product that looks like it's been worn, faded, beat to hell? Do repeated inquiries by casual hat wearers cause you to source different different building materials or use different construction techniques?
Well, that's an easy question to answer. No, I do not source other materials or techniques to appease them. I don't. But I have distressed and made hats for costumes and stuff like that to appease them, but I'm not going to change who I am for that. So they're going to get a piece for their costume, but it's going to be able to hold up in the real world.
Have hats become so esoteric that cosplayers hold sway over what hatters will stock and make? And in what ways is or isn't that a disservice to the craft? Or does it even matter?
It doesn't change me at all, right? Because I'm just going to do what I do. But I do think that it, in some ways, especially the Indiana Jones cosplay, that you do have a lot of people who are fans who they have this notion in their head, and I don't want to discourage anyone. I want to encourage people to get into hat making, not out of hat making, but I want them to do it right. And I want to do it to where it grows hat wearers and hat making, not set it back. So you do have a flux of people that come in and go, I want to do hat making, and they see a video or they read a book or a thread somewhere or a post somewhere, and they get the broad strokes, they put the hat together, but they're missing so many points. And it looks like what it's supposed to be, but the construction is lacking. Because I've had a lot of people come to me and go, hey, I bought this hat from this person and it's just not hitting it right. Can you clean this up? Can you repair this? Can you make this right? And I think it discourages people and it puts a bad mark on hatters, and it could chase people away. For the professional hat maker like myself, where I make a living, this is how I feed myself, this is how I take care of, when my kid was younger, feed him and take care of my kid. It's not a hobby, it's not a weekend, it's not a side hustle. So here it is, if I don't sell a hat, my lights go off. I guess you'd call them hobbyist hatters. If they don't sell a hat, they got their day job. To me, it does upset me a little bit, because if they're not constructing the hat correctly and people start to see this, they get kind of discouraged and they give up, and it's a bad mark on hat making.
Can we talk for a moment then about how modern hat wearing behavior, not just with costumers, but just across the board, has resulted in stiffer felts, and also how in the costuming circle, particularly where Indiana Jones is concerned with prop replica fans, the colors of the hats have been affected in order to simulate certain things right out of the box. From what I've observed, not to lead the question too much, but the true colors of those hats in direct sunlight look correct because he was outside a lot. But a lot of these guys want to stand in lobbies of hotels and indoors and other things, but they want the hats still look good in photography. So between just the modern trend of hats being made from stiffer felt, not with you and not with other high-end hatters, but by and large, that's what's happening. And then the way that the costuming world has kind of affected what colors of felts you guys are willing to stock. How has that modern behavior moved the needle at all? And is that something you're constantly having to push up against?
Since hats are not as commonplace as they were like in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, people don't know the etiquette. You know, there's a lot of people when they come into my shop and they walk out and, you know, every hat walks out with a hat box. They don't even know how to carry the hat box correctly. It's because it's not commonplace. You know, they carry it out like it's a cake box, and I have to kind of show them. To me, I'm always inspiring to be like a 30s, 40s Borsalino, where it was thin and pliable and you can kind of move that felt around. And so that's what, to me, the perfect fedora is. And sometimes I can't do that because people are like, yeah, it moves too much. And then when it comes to the Raiders hat and the indie fans, that's where the nightmare really comes in, because they want something that is not physically possible. They want the hat, the creases to stay perfectly as I put them into the hat when I crease it into the hat, but they also want it to be so pliable and floppy that, like when he's hanging off the truck in Raiders, the wind is causing the brim to flap, and they want both of those. And I'm like, you can't have both. It's physically impossible, and it's a hard thing to get across to someone who wants it both. Like I said, they build this image in their head that's just not there, and it is a hard thing to fight up against. And you know, the best way I handle it is just to kind of educate.
Did you guys ever go to Sunday school?
Aurelius asks, why do you think independent makers like yourself care more about getting every detail right than the original film costumers did? The Indiana Jones hat, for example, changes noticeably from movie to movie. Why do you think the people responsible for that iconic look weren't as focused on preserving it film to film? That inconsistency has always bothered me, and I'm curious how you see it.
Yeah, I totally agree with them. I think it's because when they first made the Raiders film, they were just making a little film, George and Steven, because they were a fan of old serials. And they didn't even think that thing was going to be around more than a couple of days. And so when it became a big hit and they brought back, you got a different costumer, talking to Steve, working off of 4, they didn't like the caricature of the Raiders hat, so they wanted to walk away from it. I think most movie makers are like, oh, we're going to make this look livable, make it look like the character's real. That's what Deborah Landis did, and that's why it looks so great in Raiders. And they look great in the other movies as well. It's just that they didn't expect people to be freeze framing and looking at every little detail. But I have to do it to not only make myself happy, but to make fans happy who want that hat. And I don't blame them, and I want it too.
I would have done anything to get it. You would have done the same.
Evander asks, what kind of hat does Renee Belloc wear in Egypt? Is it a Panama hat or is it a linen hat with a fedora or Borsellino cut?
I want to say it's a straw hat, but I'm not 100% sure on it because I never really focused on it because no one's ever asked me to make that hat.
Troy Pacelli wants to know, does Mr. Penman have any suggestions for resources regarding caring for hats?
Yes. Okay. So the 2 biggest things you can do to take care of your hat, get a very good hat brush. They make them out of horsehair or boar bristles. I like boar bristles better because they're stiffer. And if you do have a collection of hats, you want 2 brushes. You want one for lighter color hats and you want one for darker color hats. Usually they're color coded. The bristles are not any different other than the fact that it's a code to say, oh, this is light bristles. Those go for light colored hats. These are dark bristles. They go for dark color hats. You don't want to kind of mix the fibers. So brushing your hat regularly will prolong the life of your hat and the look of the hat, because not only does it keep little dust, dirt particles off your hat, but what it does is if you brush it properly, it keeps the nap tight. The tighter the nap, the smoother it's going to look, the nicer it's going to feel, and the stronger it's going to hold up under adverse conditions. So brushing a hat would be number 1. Number 2 is how you handle your hat. You should don and doff your hat by the brim, not by the pinch, because believe it or not, your hands are the dirtiest things on your body, and there's a lot of oils on there, and they do transfer over, and especially when people grab it by that pinch in the front on the top of the crown, and the repeated pressure with those oils and that dirt will dry it out, and that's when holes start to develop. And once that happens, there's really very little you can do about it.
Walk us through real quick the proper method for brushing a hat, just talking us through it. Because there is a way to do it. There's a right way and a wrong way.
Right, absolutely. So the way hats are made, when the felt is made, you have to mimic how the felt was made. And the way felt is made is that imagine yourself a cone made out of metal that has holes in it. They put it on this stand here and it rotates counterclockwise. And they're blowing air, water, and steam, and it mats up and it's going counterclockwise. So when you brush a hat, I always suggest that you pop the creases out and you brush counterclockwise from the very top. You just go clockwise all the way around the crown, all the way on the brim. Now, if you imagine that hat and you flip it over, you want to continue that pattern. And that's where I see people make mistakes, because they go, oh, if I tell them counterclockwise, they're going to do counterclockwise on the brim, but it's one piece. And when you flip it over, you got to follow that pattern. So that means you would have to go clockwise on the underside of the brim.
Krista asks, do you happen to have any recommendations on how to remove salt from a leather hat for amateurs? She says.
Usually water will do the trick and isopropylene alcohol will do the trick, but the problem with that is you are in the risk of drying out the leather, which means if you do use that method to clean it, you would have to have a leather treatment to replenish the oils into the leather again. So I would recommend, and you can get yourself like from Amazon, a little tiny tin that costs just several dollars, like $7 or $8, of Picard's oil, leather oil. Don't get the cream, get the oil so it saturates into the leather. So you can treat it, wipe it clean, and then once that dries, and you come in with a linen cloth, put some oil on it and rub it into the sweatband, and then let it sit overnight, and then you're good to go. And I would suggest doing that, and that's how I treat sweatbands. So I would have to assume I don't do leather hats; I do leather sweatbands. So I would have to assume that would be the same.
Patterson Dave says hat making seems to share certain similarities with shoemaking. Are there any bespoke shoemakers who you have ever discussed your profession with?
No, but I totally agree. I love watching videos of shoemakers. They're absolutely amazing. And I do have a shoemaker here locally where I have my workshop, and I do take my shoes to him to work on, and I have many times in the past and everything. Really nice couple, his little mom and pop shop, and he does absolutely fantastic work. But we've never had the opportunity to sit down and talk shop.
What is the most interesting bespoke hat you have ever been asked to make or made for yourself?
I know what my most challenging was from. I guess the most challenging would be my most interesting. So there's a few that I made for William Shatner were the most challenging. So I would say was the most interesting, and they were Western style hats.
Have you always multiplied your repair estimates by a factor of 4?
Certainly, sir. How else can I keep my reputation as a miracle worker?
Your reputation is secure, Scotty.
With a flood of fly-by-night hat makers and social media feed ads hawking their wares on eBay and Etsy, I think this final question from Analog Toys is a great way to end the interview. If the hat makes the man, what makes the hat maker?
Ooh, man, that's good. I don't think I've ever even thought about that. The hat makes the man. What makes the hat maker? I think there's a couple ways I could answer that. To make the hat maker, you have to be fluid. You can't be rigid and formulated. I think that's the biggest mistake I see in a lot of young hat makers is that they're reaching out for a formula so they can kind of regurgitate it, and they're focused on selling hats. They want to be in the business as soon as possible, and they're not focusing on learning the craft intimately. And to do that, you have to stay away from formulas, and you have to be fluid. I'm probably going to have a different answer to that question probably 3 days from now, because that's a great question. I've never ever thought about it. It is really, really good. It's kind of thrown me a little bit, but that's the best way I can answer it right now, is that like I really want to like chase that rabbit down that rabbit hole. I can only talk about me and what I observe, because right now I'm literally teaching my son. Like at first he has to learn my way, but I don't want him to stay there. I want him to learn my way and then challenge my way the same way I did with Steve. And I think that's the moment I knew I was a hat maker, a true hat maker, is I learned a lot from Steve and a couple other hat makers. And I held Steve to such a high standard, and I put him up on this pedestal, and he belongs there. He's phenomenal. I don't think people realize how great of a hat maker he was, and I miss him dearly.
Seem to have reached the age where life stops giving us things and starts taking them away.
He was kind of, to use an actor's term, he was typecast because of his fame of making Indy 4. And for like more than 10 years, that's all he made. And like myself, he makes everything truly by hand. There's no automation at all. There's no blocking machine. There's no pouncing machine. There's no ironing machine. There's no sewing machine. So he kind of got pigeonholed doing that. But got to think about it. That guy replicated the most scrutinized hat, and he brought it back to its glory, to the point that everyone else had a much easier time replicating the Indy hat, especially the Raiders hat. So every person who ever made an Indy hat post Steve, whether they've talked to him or somehow or another, he has helped them to do that. He made that road a lot easier for everyone, and that includes me. When I pulled Steve down from that pedestal and challenged what he taught me is when I became a hat maker. And that's when our interactions together became different, because I was constantly, up until that point, was asking him questions. And then there were times that he would call me up and go, "Hey, John, I ran into in this problem with this hat, and this is how I normally solve it. Do you have another way?" And then I would go, "Oh yeah, I have these 2 other ways how I solve that problem." Then the conversations became different at that point. That's when I became a hat maker. And I think you need to have that to be a really good hat maker. You have to challenge what you've learned. And I think that's what Steve wanted out of me. He wanted me to surpass him I'm not saying I surpassed him, but that's what he wants. And as me as is teaching my son, I want him to surpass me. So I don't want him to be so formulated where he just copies me and that's all he does. I want him to, at some point, challenge me and surpass me and beat me at my game.